Alright folks, how are you doing? So, in this video we're going to be looking at the book The Great Deception by Commons Beaumont, and he comes up with a very much unheard of theory that Alexander the Great was actually Scottish, and Macedonia was located within what is today the Kingdom of Scotland. Pretty out there in terms of radical theories, but let's get into it. So, it starts off with this traditional rhyme, I guess. Oh, the grand old Duke of York, he had 10,000 men. He marched them up to the top of the hill, and he marched them down again. I think that's a nursery rhyme, in fact. So let's get into the book. Of the period of Alexander, unhappily, little survives in the way of authenticated ancient history relating to his remarkable career. It is an extraordinary fact that over 300 years, until Arrian and Curtius wrote works purporting to describe his expeditions, nothing apparently was written of him. Both these men, highly distinguished, lived from about the middle of the 1st century AD to its end, and although the 7 books of Arrian remain fairly intact, of Curtius' 10 books, the first 2 are lost, and the remainder reveal considerable gaps or deletions of events suggesting the work of a censor at a later date, as in very many other cases. Curtius must be suspected of having described movements or events that embarrassed later authorities. Arrian, for his part, wrote in a colloquial style imitating Xenophon, with the difference that Xenophon knew Cyrus personally, whereas Arrian was dependent on such records or extracts as he could collect and whose accuracy we cannot check. I wonder where we would find these deleted or, the unaltered copies of these ancient sources. Probably the Vatican, but who has access to there? One might have supposed that Josephus, who covers a wide field, would have had something more to say of Alexander, who, previous to going to Babylon, had visited Jerusalem, where the high priest and elders met him in tremulation outside the city, when, to their surprise and relief, he venerated the high priest's mitre with the name of the deity inscribed in gold. Yet Josephus dismissed his going to Babylon in a few words. Incidentally, I've heard the theory somewhere, I can't remember where, that Alexander the Great was half Jewish on his mother's side, and that wouldn't surprise me, because there was a source, I can't remember where, I just remember I heard it somewhere, that in Alexandria all the Jewish boys were called either Alexander, after Alexander the Great, or after one of his generals like Ptolemy. So for a while in the city of Alexander, all the Jewish population were naming their boys Alexander. Well, why would they do that? Because he was Jewish. Simply as simple as that. All this is significant when we consider that Alexander overthrew the long-held Persian domination of the ancient world. I'm sure it was Michael Desarian who said that, in fact, and went as far east as is India and as far south as to build the city of Alexandria. It constitutes a mystery that so famous a figure who, like his father Philip II, was a great patron of learning, was educated by Aristotle, and surrounded himself with scholars, was yet apparently ignored and almost forgotten for over 3 centuries. The explanation may be that his movements and conquests were too revealing for those whose object it was to prevent any geographical or historical description which might throw another light on the past and prejudice the aims they had in view. Alexander's first great battle was by the river Granicus in Phrygia, Hanover. In other words, this was in Germany, and from there he pursued Darius Codamanus. How do you say that? Codamanus, I guess, into Asiatic Silesia, where he gained another overwhelming victory over the Persian, who fled, leaving his mother, wife, and children at Alexander's mercy. Some 2 years later, for the 3rd time, they met in the plains of Gaugamela in Assyria, Saxony, and again the Persian king fled. Alexander then visited Babylon, but not for long, as he set out again, this time into Media, Hungary, in pursuit of Darius, whom he followed into Parthia. The Partheni and Alani were Mazagetai, dwelling in the present Finland and North Russia. But once more Darius escaped him, After this, Alexander proceeded over the mountains, the Urals, then reached Bactria, Turkestan, and finally crossed the Hindu Kush, where he descended to the Indus. In India, he easily conquered and civilized the natives, who called the invaders the noble Kayato Arya, whence developed the Brahmin caste from intercourse with the Macedonian soldiery. So in other words, the caste system in India was brought about by Alexander the Great, apparently, according to Beaumont. Which is fairly interesting theory. But what does the footnotes say? 134. Geoffrey Higgins, the archaeologist, describes a crucifix, a ring, a lamb, and an elephant carved upon the fire tower of, what's this, Brecon, Forfar, at an ancient date. The ring, emblem of eternity, and its cobra, a sacred serpent, linga, phallus, ioni or yoni, the feminine organ, were all Hindu. The Ganesa of India is a very stubborn fellow to be found here. Interesting observation. His return march is uncertain, but he ultimately reached Ecbatana or Egbertana, capital of Media, after 6 years' absence, and from there returned to Babylon. He had proclaimed Babylon the capital of the Macedonian Empire and had been there for some months when he died of pneumonia after an illness of 11 days caused by a chill contrasted while bathing. On his first visit, he was received with the greatest demonstrations of enthusiasm by the populace, who thronged the walls, the streets, and the outside of Nebuchadnezzar's palace or castle. They strewed flowers, burnt frankincense, and loudly acclaimed him. The Chaldean and Babylonian magi met him, singing hymns of praise, and led him to the palace. Was he not of Chaldean birth himself as a Macedonian? Were not his religious beliefs those of the Babylonians, despite his tolerance? It was natural and proper that they should honour a prince of their own blood, who had completely overthrown the tyrannical Persian kings. Now, before we go any further here, the whole revision to the geography of this makes a lot more sense, logistically speaking, than the accepted version, because if you think about it, fighting the battle of, Gog and Magog in the middle of Iraq or Iran, way out in the middle of the desert, the Persians supposedly had like 1 million men, or hundreds of thousands at least, even the Macedonian army was 30,000-40,000. How would you feed and water that many people? It would be a struggle to do it today, never mind way back in the ancient world. But if this is happening in the fertile lands of Europe, in the middle of Germany, for example, it makes a lot more sense, because it would be much easier to feed and water that many people if they're in Europe rather than the middle of the deserts of the Middle East, if you think about it. Just a point to consider. Alexander decided to rebuild Babylon. He was disgusted with the ruined state in which he found it, with walls broken down, the accumulated rubbish from the immense temple of Bel lying yet, and an enormous breach in the river, which needed to be restored to its former channel. He issued orders for 10,000 men to clear the rubbish from the temple of Bel, and another 10,000 to restore the river to its former channel. How much of this was completed is not known. Another point, incidentally, before I go any further, is if you watch the hideous movie with Colin Farrell, why is it all the Macedonians are Irish? Perhaps because making them Scottish would have been just too on the nose. But you've got Irish actors playing the Macedonians. That alone kind of speaks for itself. On his return from India, the Chaldean priests met Alexander outside the gates and ordered him not to enter the city except by the east gate, probably owing to some astrological prediction. All we know from the vestige of its history at this time is that it had a harbour with ships and shipbuilding in the yards, very unaccountable as relating to the alleged Babylon in Iraq. Yeah, exactly. One curious piece of information has come down to us giving the names of various embassies sent to Alexander when at Babylon to invoke his favour. They were European Scythians, Scots from the Perth area. Check out We the Scythians by David Allen Ritchie. Celtic and Iberian tribes, Cimmerians, Ethiopia, Mull, Carthage, Waterford region of Southern Ireland. That's another thing, by the way, the Carthaginian War between the Romans and Carthage actually was fought in Ireland. Libya, Leinster, Ireland, Brutai, Alba, or Albania, Stirling in southwest Scotland, Luscinia, branch of Bruti, Tyrrhena, that's how you say it? Tyrrhena, sorry, I can't pronounce that. Terheny, I have no idea. Lancashire, Delphi, Ben Crockin Argyll, Ellis, Lismore Island, mouth of Loch Lynn, Corinth, Crinan, head of Cantyre, Argyll, and Epidaurus, South Argyll. These are not conjectural sites, but all related to Britain, not one hailed from the east. And when we come to consider the original situation of Macedonia, is it not that what we should expect? What interest would the Celtic and Iberian tribes in the north of Europe have had in a king proposing to make his capital at the other end of the world? Exactly. I mean, this is questions that you have to ask when you study history. Or the Bruti, or in fact any of them. Yeah. I mean, nobody stops to ask these questions. That's what makes the likes of a Commons Beaumont so unique. The explanation comes from the original situation of Macedonia itself. Notice, by the way, the middle and latter syllables. Edonia, Edonia, the Edoni. Okay, so you got the Caledonians, and you got the Macedonians. What do they all have in common? They're all Edonians. Edonites, in other words. That's that was largely what the Edain in Lord of the Rings was based upon, incidentally. These mainly North British tribes or clans, apart from those in Erin, were naturally anxious to know how their frontiers might be affected by this intended great shift of the capital of Macedonia. They also naturally desired to enter into treaties with the victorious king, who was transferring his ruling city from Chaldea, or Caledon, to the Chaldea in the very south of Yorkshire, over 350 miles distant, because Babylon, according to Commons Beaumont, was actually York. Also, we should not overlook their anxiety in regard to the king's character. His father Philip, who had paved the way for his son's crushing victories by his unconquerable army, small in numbers but perfectly trained and equipped, was for all his military genius a cruel tyrant, and kept all the Greek states in vassalage or fear. Was there a risk of Alexander doing the same? He was generous, impulsive, but disposed to intoxication and murderous passions, during which he had killed several of his nearest friends. The Book of Maccabees throws a light on how he was regarded later. The land was silenced before him, and he was exalted, and his heart was lifted up, and he gathered together a very mighty army, and ruled over lands and principalities, and they became tributary unto him. 1 Maccabees 1, 3-4. Exalted. The editors of the Cambridge Maccabees analysed that word. Had he a psychological problem? Was he a mad genius? Alexander seems to have become intoxicated by his success. He appears to have even had a fatuous notion that he was divine. At all events, he encouraged the spread of a report that Jupiter Ammon had called him his son, and granted him the distinction of being a conqueror of the world. In accordance with this truly exalted conception of himself, he exacted divine honours, not only from the Persians but also from the Macedonians as well, and even ordered the philosopher Callisthenes to be put to death for refusing to prostrate himself before him. The character of Alexander the Great presents something of the nature of a psychological puzzle. There was evidently a process of degeneration, which became more rapid as the years went on. Alexander had coins minted showing his features relating to the god Hermes, or Ammon, the most vital deity of the Britons, or Macedonians for this particular argument, superior in some respects even to Apollo, as Homer recognized, because he was the living deity, in the person of the arch-druid or arch-hierarch, who spoke as the Vox Dei to the entire Celtic world. If Nebuchadnezzar, as head of the Chaldeans, had been so ordained, it seems extremely probable that Alexander was accorded such divinity in his turn, for regal claims to divinity were not uncommon. He would in such circumstances be justified in expecting Callisthenes to prostrate himself, as did others. Alexander, who had utterly destroyed the Asiatic Persian tyranny, which had enslaved the West for so long, deserved deification if any monarch did from his own people, the Chaldeans. So basically, Alexander, when he attacked the Persian Empire, it was basically the ancient world version of the Soviet Union, basically. That's how I read it, and they were on the cusp of taking Britain, but he struck first and destroyed them. The Macedonians, okay, I can't read that. Dirty British coaster with a salt-caked smokestack. Okay. What does this footnote say? The learned editors do not seem to be aware that Philip II was also hailed as a god and had a statue of himself executed as such. I remember that from the movie. So let's get into the Macedonians here. There are also other outstanding facts relating to the Macedonians that are of considerable importance, for they clearly reveal that they were of Caledonian origin. It is known to the all Bible students that the name of Heth related to the Macedonians, and as Waddell states, was corrupted into Hittites, later Chittim, and possibly Shittim, which variation may refer to Shet, Sheth, or Seth, otherwise Shetland, as their place of origin. There is no doubt as to their importance in the evolution of civilization. Heth, or Cheth, was accounted even the second son of Canaan in one passage, but as Hittim or Chittim are called the sons of Javan, son of Japheth, earliest of all the patriarchs in Genesis. When Abram seized the land of Canaan and built Hebron, apparently sons of Heth had preceded him. He was buried beside Sarah, his wife, in the cave of Machpelah in the field of Ephron, a Hittite, which Abram purchased of the sons of Heth. Abram rode roughshod over the Philistines, or how do you say this? Meazramites, I guess, in those parts, took their cities and extracted tribute from them, but compensated the sons of Heth for the field of Ephron. The Hittites, or Chittim, were the most active and important nation in the southwest, especially from a maritime point of view. Ships of Chittim shall afflict Assur, prophesied Balaam, Numbers 24:24. They had a great deal to do with the metal trade also. Cyprus was an important naval base of theirs to enable ships of Chittim to intervene when needed along the lines of sea communication. Cyprus produced copper, but eventually the original Cyprus was destroyed in a huge earthquake and became derelict. It was then called Off Husa Island, Isle of Serpents, meaning earthquake, volcanic eruption, lightning, etc. Sorry about this. I'm not really familiar with biblical or ancient Greek terms all that much, so I apologize about my butchering the pronunciation in some cases. I have identified this island as one of the Isles of Chittim, surviving yet as Lundy, 16 miles off the west coast of Cornwall, today a mass of meteoric debris. It is perhaps interesting to record that when Alexander the Great was besieging Tyre, he prevented the Tyrians from sending their women and children by sea to Carthage. This was no Mediterranean maneuver. Tyre is represented today by Portland and Malcolm, Regis, Dorset, both extremely ancient. Very interesting when you get into the works of Gary Blickliff, I should say. He wrote a whole book about Portland and its connections and all that sort of thing. Yeah, that was his name, Gary Blickliff. I've actually got the book on the shelf. I'll link it below. The Tyrians wanted to send their women and children to distant County Waterford in southern Ireland, the original Carthage, but the Chittim or Macedonians from their rocky island of Usa intercepted any ships which dared to pass that way. Ophusa or Lundy commanded the approaches both from the English and the Bristol Channel. The name Chittim came to be used as a synonym for the lands of the west, but it referred to the Macedonians. Their true appellation, as Waddell is at great pains to specify, was Cassi, Catai, or Chatai. Hence the Isles of Chittim were also called Cassiderites, Isles of the Cassi. He throws another curious sidelight on their activities by claiming, with his long study of Indian and antiquities, that the Brahmins of India believe in their descent from the original white men, the Aryan caste Kyato Arya, who colonized their country for a while. They were Ari or Arya in ancient Pali, the noble ones. They were Macedonians, led thither by Alexander. We retrieve the name Kati or Khati in Caithness and in the Don Valley and elsewhere, whence came the original Chaldeans or Caledonians. The lions were the Catai or cats, included the Thracians and or the Macedonians. The famous latter people were descended from the Edonians, whose territories originally embraced eastern Scotland and the Moray Firth to the mouth of the Tay. Hence the name Mac, son of the Edones. Their religious head was the Gad or God, Hermes, chief hierarch or archdruid, whose city was Ur of the Chaldees or Samothrace in southern Orkney. This people sent colonies to southern England and to Gades or Sodom, Avonmouth, Somerset, called Hittite or Chittim, even before Abram and Lot reached these same parts. If any existing people can claim to be Atlanteans, it is these Caledonians. There's another theory that Beaumont had, that Abraham from the Bible was really a Scot from the north. Check out Jed Skeptic's channel, Britain, the Key to World History, where he covers all this. The ancient clan Chatham still flourishes. Among its chiefs is the Macintosh of Macintosh, whose estates stretch from Petty to Lochaber, and who claims descent from Heth, son of Canaan, or Canaan. Such is recorded in the Iona Club transactions, which contain the pedigrees of the most ancient Scottish clans. Long ago the Macintosh dwelt at Tor Castle or Inverlochy, today a crumbling ruin, yet famous as the site where, how do you say this name? I don't know how you pronounce this, sorry. His ghost so troubled the usurper of Duncan's throne was murdered by Macbeth. On the other hand, the Macphersons of Cluny claim to be the senior branch of Clan Chattan, and from the exhaustive evidence contained in recent work, the chiefs of Clan Macpherson, this seems to be indisputable. So if you belong to any of these clans, look into your history. In any case, whether the titular honour rests with the Macphersons of Cluny or the Macintosh, both are of the same noble blood as the Macedonians, who have dwelt in their motherland for possibly over 5,000 years. It is a staggering but also elevating thought of a clan that has played its part over so many great periods of the past, and Scotland can claim others of most ancient pedigree. So you notice how all this is, all this is never brought up by anyone else. It's all hidden, it's all swept under the rug, Oh man, the lies that have been told to the Scots about their own history, it's unbelievable. The fact that the Macphersons and the Macintoshes of Clan Chattan are still dwelling in or about their ancient domains and still a virile and commanding people should give us understanding of the reality of the past in relation to the Macedonians, so wrongly relegated to a part of the Balkans. Tor Castle has... Another thing as well I noticed actually in reading Robin Hood Revealed is that William Wallace uses some of the same tactics that Alexander the Great used. And Robert the Bruce as well. Like, for example, the Sheltrons are basically just a modified phalanx. Tor Castle has lain in ruin for centuries, but ages before it was erected, the sons of Heth, the Catai, ventured from the north to the regions of the Og of Bashan and Gloucestershire, and became widely known as Hittim or Chittim or Gadites to the later Jews. They were worshippers of Apollo and ruled by their druids. They were men of stern discipline and brave soldiers against whom the Persians collapsed. If Alexander had not died so early, and his greedy generals had not broken up the Macedonian Empire, for the world's history subsequently would have been very different. This relocation of the Macedonians may give us the answer to the vexing problem of early coinage. Authorities such as Sir John Evans Hawkins, Ackerman, Post, and others have never been able to explain why a great many primitive British coins are Macedonian in idea and design, and stigmatize them as base or degraded imitations of the stater of Philip of Macedon. Footnote: by Macpherson of Dalchalny, whose chief was Ewan George Macpherson of Cluny. In the pedigree appears Heth, also Mac-Heth, and at Og, which touches very closely on early Bible history relating to Abram. Evans puzzled to account for their apparent relationship, and so to the reasons which impelled the Britons to strike coins on a Macedonian model, argue that there was a diffusion of gold slaters in the reign of Philip II owing to the discovery of gold at Crenades in the, Pangaeum Mountains of Macedonia, and that the barbarians of Britain imitated the Macedonian type. In his reign, gold was extensively mined in the Pangaeum, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but that's how I say it, Pangaeum Mountains, and brought him in a revenue of over £200,000 per annum. Incidentally, no sign of any gold workings has been discovered in the mountains of Macedonia, nor does the stratum lend itself to such a likelihood. Evans admitted that British Macedonian coins were not slavish imitations and showed innovations. No doubt of the derivation from the slater, he said. Possibly an original type, and probably the carefully dressed hair was one of the attributes of Apollo Belinus of Gaul and Britain, whose head it is supposed was represented. There is no doubt that Apollo Belinus was used to decorate the coins of the Britons, whose king took the name of the god of their title, Cuno Belin, and Cassi Belin, corrupted by the Romans into Benolanus, I guess. Nor is there any doubt that they were designs independent of Philip II, for their base or barbaric types, crude as they were, dated from a period long anterior to Philip, who unified the coinage and designed it artistically upon the earlier models. Macedonian history, reconstructed as Caledonian in origin, explains the object of the designs with the striking astronomical symbols they represent. They may be compared with the ancient engraved stones, such as the Golspie stone. Is that the one in Iona? I think it might be. I've been to Iona, incidentally. But yeah, I know what he's referring to anyway. Both early British and Philippine coins made great play of the sign Pegasus in accord with the Chaldean knowledge of astronomy. Studies even of these coins reveal Pegasus as a sign of the zodiac on the earliest models, comparing the sign later allotted to Aquarius. The coins not only exhibit the sun and moon, but also twin cometary bodies identified by the spectacles, designed to represent revolutionary movement from sign to sign. The intention was plainly a pious reminder from the Druid-led world that the deity Apollo, representing Sirius, also shown on the obverse side, destroyed the world by a celestial body or bodies which traditionally were first observed in the sign of Pegasus, a sign later changed to Aquarius, with his urn to record for all ages that then occurred the great catastrophe, the flood, which afflicted the ancient world and especially Scotland. I'll get into this, by the way, in other works when we look at other authors. But this is vital to bear in mind, at the back of your mind, because we will be returning to this. Macedonian coins of the Philippine Age have been found at many places in the British Isles. How can we never hear about this? A parcel of coins of Macedonian kings of Syria was discovered on the southwest coast of Ireland early in the 18th century. Macedonian British gold coins were unearthed at Audley, Essex, which Evans said were similar, both observe and reverse, to the Slater of Philip. At, how do you say this, Uriconian, near Droitwich, once an important Romano-British city, coins described as a degraded imitation of the Slater of Philip were unearthed with Roman coins of the Hadrian age and earlier, as in many similar instances. The most interesting was a find of coins of Philip, of Alexander, and of the Bruti on the estate of Cairnbulg, Aberdeenshire, in 1824. The Edonai territories were in the actual Macedonia itself, and this, in conjunction with the coins of the Bruti, who dwelt in southwest Scotland, would suggest that the owner collected them from British sources in the reign of Alexander himself, or not much later. Before coined money was invented, gold, silver, and brass rings were recognised medium of exchange. And we've got a footnote here. Kasai coins sometimes show Capricorn as half goat, half fish, with the word epi, epilis, epi, com. It is probably Erelis or Eri, relating to Errol in Perth, a conspicuous landmark in the Firth of the Tay and once an important town. P being the Greek R. In Egypt are fresco paintings on tombs showing people bringing tribute in bags containing gold and silver rings, and vases have been found depicting persons weighing gold and silver rings. Lindsay says of Ireland that great quantities of gold, silver, and brass rings have been dug up at various times. They were used as money, graduated according to troy weight in multiples of 12, not 10. He records a find of brass rings that fully loaded a large cart discovered in a tumulus in County Monaghan, indicating the antiquity of this medium for purchasing power in the British Isles. On the other matter observing of our attention in relation to the antiquity and origin of the Macedonians is their national emblem, the unicorn. Oh, where do we see the unicorn? Exactly. Daniel described Macedonia symbolically as a he-goat with one horn. The first Macedonian king traditionally made the unicorn his ensign and designated his capital Agia, or Goatstown, and the son of Alexander the Great by Roxanne was named Son of the Goat, the beast being generally represented with one long straight horn, later in appearance like a horse with a similar straight horn. Alien, in his Natural History, said the woolly rhinoceros existed in Britain in far prehistoric days like the mammoth or woolly elephant, its remains having been found under the drift deposit. To this day, the unicorn rampant is one of the supporters of the royal coat of arms, facing the lion rampant, and prior to the Union, the royal arms of Scotland carried a unicorn rampant as supporter on each side. It wants some explaining away. You actually see this in some of the castles and things. In fact, I think you actually see this very thing at Holyrood. I'm pretty sure I saw it, the two unicorns facing each other. Holyrood Palace. Altogether, therefore, in origin, history, and activities, supported as they are in nomenclature, in classic history, in geography, in coinage, and finally in that strangely characteristic emblem of the unicorn, the Macedonians appear to fill the role of the ancient Caledonians of Scotland, who remain to this day one of the leading and characteristic peoples of the world, although unhappily in numbers so limited through force of circumstances. It is therefore any wonder that the Babylonians of York hailed Alexander the Great as their monarch. And I think that's the end of the chapter. Yeah, it is. So there you go. I hope you found that educational, controversial perhaps, but be sure to leave your thoughts and comments below. Thank you for watching.